I used to think everyone was born with an instruction manual except me. When I was small, the difference wasn't a big idea. It was 1,000 tiny moments. How my hands rested when I spoke, how I flinched at loud games, how I watched other children like I was studying a language I couldn't pronounce. I wanted to belong the way you want water when you're thirsty, not as a strategy, not as a statement, just as a simple human need. In photos from primary school, the other kids lean into each other. Their shoulders touch, their smiles are wide and certain. I'm usually at the edge, standing a little too straight, my grin careful, like I'm trying not to disturb the air. My mother kept those photos in a drawer and only brought them out when relatives visited. She would tap the corner of the picture with her nail and say, "Here. That one is you." It was always said like she was pointing out something that had wandered into the wrong frame. I didn't understand what I was doing wrong. I wasn't trying to be strange. I loved small things. The smooth shape of marbles in my pocket, the smell of clean paper, the way sunlight made patterns through curtains. I could sit for a long time drawing the same face over and over, trying to capture an expression that felt honest. When the other boys ran outside and kicked dust into the air, I stayed near the wall and watched, not because I hated them, but because I felt like I would break if I stepped into their world too suddenly. At school, the difference became a sound. It started with nicknames. They weren't the kind you laugh about later. They were said with a certain tilt of the head, a bright cruelty disguised as amusement. I learned early that people could make you feel smaller without raising their voice. They would mimic my walk, my voice, the way I held my books close to my chest. Sometimes they didn't even need words, just a look exchanged between two boys, a smothered laugh behind a hand, and I understood. I had become a shared joke. The teachers saw parts of it. They caught the obvious moments, the shove in the corridor, the pencil snapped in half on my desk, the sudden silence when I entered a room. They would tell everyone to be kind in the same tone they used for "line up." Then the lesson would continue, and the kindness request would evaporate like chalk dust. I tried to fix myself the way a child fixes things, by copying. I watched which jokes made the group laugh and practiced them at home in front of the mirror. I lowered my voice and tried to make it steadier. I forced myself into games that felt too rough, too fast, and I smiled even when my stomach tightened. I learned to laugh a second after everyone else so it looked natural. I learned to keep my hands still. Once, in 4th grade, a boy cornered me near the drinking fountain. He didn't hit me. He didn't need to. He leaned in and whispered, "Why are you like that?" Like my existence was an inconvenience he'd been forced to notice. I remember staring at the water dribbling from the fountain and thinking, I don't know, I truly don't know. That was the worst part, how early the confusion arrived. There were things I felt that didn't fit into the boxes people tried to hand me. I didn't have the words for it. I just had a sense of being out of place inside my own skin. Adults spoke about normal, as if it was a hallway everyone could walk down and I couldn't find the door. Children spoke about real, as if it had a uniform and I'd lost mine. At home, I was quiet about school, not because I didn't want help, but because I sensed, without anyone saying it, that my pain would be treated like proof of my failure. My father came home tired. He wanted silence and simple answers. My mother wanted me to be easy. I could feel it in the way she exhaled when I walked into a room, as if she was bracing for something. My older relatives liked to comment on everything: my posture, my expression, my clothes. Sit properly, talk properly, don't do that with your hands. Why are you always alone? Smile. You look strange. Sometimes the advice came wrapped in concern, which made it harder to resist. Sometimes it came as irritation, like I was testing them on purpose. But the message was always the same: change, become less noticeable, become more like what we expected. I became good at reading rooms the way other kids became good at sports. I could tell when my father's mood was sharp by how he placed his keys. I could tell when my mother was disappointed by how gently she spoke. Disappointment in my house wasn't loud, it was polite. It was a soft closing of a door. At night, I would lie in bed and try to trace where I had gone wrong, as if my life was a homework problem. I wondered if there had been a day when I could have chosen differently, when I could have said the right thing, laughed at the right joke, swung a bat the right way, and everything would have shifted. Children believe in single moments like that. They believe the world is a puzzle with a hidden lever, but my difference wasn't a switch, it was the shape of me. In middle school, the mocking changed. It became less playful and more precise. Teenagers can sense vulnerability like a scent. They would test words on each other, see which ones drew blood, and keep using them. I learned to keep my face blank. I learned to look through people instead of at them. I learned to pretend I didn't hear. A girl once said to me in the library, not unkindly, "You're different, right?" She didn't mean it as an insult. She sounded genuinely curious. I felt heat crawl up my neck anyway. I nodded because I didn't know what else to do. She waited for me to explain. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. How do you explain something you don't have a name for? How do you describe a constant feeling of being slightly misaligned with the world, like a picture hung crooked on a wall? That same year, my mother found a notebook I kept hidden under my mattress. I had written feelings in it, soft, messy, honest things. I hadn't written anything bad. There was no plan, no confession designed for anyone else, just a child trying to understand their own heart. She sat on my bed with the notebook in her lap, her face tight with something I couldn't read. "What is this?" she asked. I felt cold. "It's nothing, it's not nothing." She flipped a page as if the paper itself offended her. "Why are you writing like this?" I remember the shame rising so fast it made me dizzy. I tried to reach for the notebook and she pulled it away. "You need to stop," she said, quiet and final. "People will think things." "What things?" I whispered. She didn't answer directly. She never did. She spoke in shadows. "Just be normal," she said. "Don't invite trouble." That was the first time I understood something about my family. They were more afraid of what the world might say than of how I felt. Maybe they thought they were protecting me. Maybe they were protecting themselves. Either way, my inner life became a hazard we were all supposed to avoid. After that, I learned to keep my feelings locked up so tightly that I sometimes couldn't find them myself. High school brought new rules. People split into groups, the loud ones, the admired ones, the invisible ones. I stayed invisible. It wasn't safe to be anything else. There were moments I tried to step toward being seen. I joined a club because I loved the quiet focus of it. I spoke to a teacher about a book I cared about. I let myself laugh once honestly in front of others. Each time, someone would notice and twist it into something embarrassing. It taught me a painful lesson. Visibility was a risk. At home, the pressure increased in small ways. My father started asking questions that weren't really questions. "Why don't you go out more? Why don't you have friends like other boys? Why do you talk like that? Why can't you just be simple?" The word simple was his favorite. It meant stop being complicated. Stop making us uncomfortable. Stop reminding us that life doesn't always follow the shape people expect. Once at a family gathering, an uncle laughed and said, "This one needs to toughen up." He said it like it was harmless advice. Everyone chuckled politely, including my father. My mother smiled too quickly. I stood there holding a plate I didn't want, feeling like my body had turned into a public conversation. I went to the bathroom and locked the door. I sat on the edge of the tub and stared at my own hands. They were the same hands I'd been told to control, to hide, to correct. They looked small and harmless and completely mine. I remember thinking with sudden clarity, I am not hurting anyone. Why do I feel like a problem? That question followed me for years. The fear of being unwanted is not a dramatic fear. It doesn't always announce itself. It shows up as carefulness, as apologies you didn't need to say, as shrinking. I learned to take up as little space as possible because space felt like something I hadn't earned. When I was 17, my father caught me crying once. It wasn't loud crying. It was the kind you do when you're trying to be silent, when you're ashamed of needing comfort. He walked into my room without knocking, saw my face, and his expression hardened. "What is wrong with you?" he said, not softly. I wiped my eyes quickly. "Nothing." He stood in the doorway like he didn't want to come closer. "You need to stop this," he said, "this weakness. This behavior, as if my sadness was a habit I was choosing." I waited for him to ask what hurt. He didn't. Instead, he said, "People notice." "Do you want to embarrass us?" That sentence landed like a stone. I nodded because nodding was safer than speaking. He left and I sat in the dark for a long time. I didn't feel angry. I felt empty. I felt like a guest in my own house. By the time I finished school, I had two versions of myself, the one the world saw and the one I kept hidden. The hidden one was tired. I didn't leave home in a dramatic way. There was no shouting, no slammed door, no final speech. My leaving was quiet, the way my whole life had become. It happened through accumulation, a remark here, a look there, a door closed gently, a conversation that stopped when I entered, an invitation not offered, a joke that made my stomach sink, a suggestion that I'd try harder to be like other people. One night, my father told me about a plan he had for my life. He spoke as if it was already decided, what I would study, where I would work, how I would present myself, what kind of person I should become. I listened, I nodded, I thanked him. Then I went to my room and stared at the wall until morning. The next day, I began preparing to leave in small, invisible steps. I gathered documents. I saved money quietly. I learned bus routes. I looked up cheap rooms. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing because I knew they would either stop me or demand an explanation I didn't have the strength to give. The day I left, my mother was in the kitchen. She was chopping vegetables, the knife steady, the rhythm familiar. I stood at the doorway with a bag in my hand. "I'm going," I said. She didn't turn around right away. When she did, her face looked surprised but not shocked, more like she had always known this would happen and had simply been hoping it wouldn't. Where? She asked. Somewhere I can work, I said. I found a place. Her eyes moved to the bag. Why didn't you tell us? I swallowed. I didn't want to fight. She pressed her lips together. This isn't good, she said quietly, as if I was breaking a household rule. I know, I replied, and I meant it. I didn't think I was doing something noble. I thought I was doing something necessary. My father wasn't home. Part of me was relieved. Part of me felt like that was the final confirmation. Even my leaving could happen without him noticing. My mother followed me to the door. She didn't hug me, she didn't say she loved me, she just said, "Be careful." I nodded and stepped outside. The air felt different immediately. Too open, too honest. When you've lived your whole life under silent judgment, freedom can feel like exposure. The first months on my own were not inspirational, they were practical, they were a lesson in survival. I rented a small room that smelled like old paint and dust. The window didn't close properly. At night, street sounds slipped in like restless thoughts. I slept with my bag near the bed because I didn't feel safe yet. I ate cheap food and learned how to make a little money last. I washed my clothes by hand sometimes, rubbing soap into fabric until my fingers ached. I found work where I could, nothing glamorous. I stood for long hours. I smiled at people who didn't know me. I learned to be polite in a way that didn't invite questions. Some nights after work, I walked slowly through the city just to avoid returning to the room too early. I watched other people through lit windows, families eating together, someone laughing while washing dishes, a couple arguing softly and then making up. Normal life, ordinary and unreachable. I would feel a quiet ache and then remind myself, this is my life now, I chose it, and even if it's hard, at least the hardness is honest. Loneliness is different when it's not forced. When I lived at home, I was lonely in the middle of people. On my own, I was lonely in a room where no one pretended to know me. Both hurt, but the second kind had space in it. It allowed me to breathe. There were days I missed my mother in a way that surprised me. I missed the sound of her moving around the kitchen. I missed the routine of the house, even though it had held so much quiet rejection. Humans can miss even the places that hurt them. We miss familiarity. We miss the idea of being held by something, even imperfectly. I didn't call home much. When I did, the conversations were short. How are you? My mother would ask. I'm fine, I'd say, because telling the truth would open a door I wasn't sure either of us could walk through. Are you eating? She'd ask, and I'd say yes, even when dinner had been bread and tea. Sometimes she'd mention my father. He says you should come back. I'd answer softly, not yet. She never asked why, or maybe she did in her own way, and I never gave her anything she could hold. We were both careful with each other, like people carrying glass. Over time, I began to notice something. Without the constant pressure to perform, my body started to unclench. My shoulders dropped. My breathing slowed. I didn't have to rehearse my voice before speaking. I could sit alone in a cafe and read without watching the door. I also began to understand how much of my difference was simply sensitivity. I noticed patterns. I felt atmospheres. I cared about small kindnesses. I could tell when someone was pretending they were okay. These were not flaws. They were just parts of me that had been treated like mistakes. Still, the old fear didn't disappear. It lived under my skin. When someone at work smiled at me, I wondered if the smile would turn into mockery later. When someone invited me somewhere, I wondered if I was the joke. When someone asked personal questions, my mind scanned for danger. The habit of guarding yourself is hard to break. Once, a coworker, an older woman with tired eyes, noticed I always ate lunch alone. She didn't pity me, she just sat down one day and opened her container like it was the most normal thing in the world. You're quiet, she said, not accusing, just observing. I nodded. She chewed thoughtfully. Quiet people see a lot, she added. Something in me loosened at that. I didn't spill my whole life onto the table. I simply said, I do. After that, she said hello to me each morning. She asked small questions, if I was sleeping well, if I needed a warmer jacket, if I'd eaten. The questions were simple, but they carried something I wasn't used to, care without conditions. It didn't fix my life, it didn't erase the past. But it reminded me that dignity sometimes arrives in ordinary forms, someone saving you a seat, someone speaking to you like you belong in the same room. I started building my life in quiet layers. I found a slightly better room. I learned how to cook a few meals. I saved a little money each month. I bought a second-hand blanket that didn't itch. I found a corner in a library where the light was good. Some nights, though, I still woke up with the old fear, the fear that I was fundamentally unwanted. It's a deep fear, and it doesn't listen to logic. You can be paying your bills, showing up to work, doing everything right, and still feel in the dark like you are a mistake that could be returned. On those nights, I would sit up and press my palm to my chest, feeling the steady proof of my own heartbeat. I would remind myself of what I had survived: school hallways, family silences, the constant demand to become someone else. I would remind myself that I was still here, still trying. Still moving forward in small, stubborn steps. I never found a moment where everything suddenly made sense. I didn't have a grand revelation. I didn't discover a perfect word that explained me and made everyone kind. Life was not that generous. What I found instead was a slow acceptance. I might always feel a little different. And that difference does not have to be a punishment. It can be a texture, a way of moving through the world with more tenderness than some people understand. I still struggle with the way my family's rejection lives inside me. Even now, when I walk past a shop window and catch my reflection, a part of my mind scans for what might be wrong. Even now, when someone praises me, I wait for the hidden criticism to follow. Even now, when I imagine going home, my stomach tightens. I have visited sometimes briefly. The house looks the same. The furniture hasn't moved. My mother offers tea. My father asks practical questions and avoids my eyes. Nothing is said directly. Nothing is repaired. The silence remains, shaped by years of habit. When I leave those visits, I feel a familiar sadness. Not sharp, not dramatic, just a steady grief for what I didn't receive. The simple permission to exist without being corrected. But I also feel something else now, a quiet pride. I learned to stand on my own legs. I learned to find work and keep it. I learned to feed myself. I learned to pay rent. I learned to endure loneliness without turning it into bitterness. I learned to be gentle with myself in the ways no one was gentle with me when I was young. There are still days when I feel like a child on the edge of the photo. There are days when a laugh behind me makes my body tense. There are days when I wish, for just 1 hour, I could move through the world without wondering if I am too much or not enough. And there are days, quiet, ordinary days, when I sit with a warm cup in my hands and feel a kind of peace that doesn't need permission. I look at the small room I've made into a home and I think, I am here, I am not a theory, I am a person, my life is not a miracle story. I did not rise above everything and become shining proof of anything. I still struggle, I still get tired, I still feel the ache of being misunderstood. I still carry a fear that love is conditional and can be withdrawn without warning, but I have not turned that pain into cruelty. I have not made a weapon out of what I survived. I have tried instead to live with dignity. Sometimes that dignity looks like showing up to work even when my heart feels heavy. Sometimes it looks like saying no when I used to say yes out of fear. Sometimes it looks like letting myself rest without guilt. Sometimes it looks like walking away from people who demand I perform a version of myself that keeps them comfortable. I don't know what the future will bring. I don't promise myself a perfect ending. I only promise myself this: I will not abandon who I am just to earn a place at someone else's table. I spent my childhood trying to change the shape of myself to fit. Now, as an adult, I'm learning something quieter and harder. I'm learning to take up the space I occupy, not loudly, not as a fight, just as a fact.